Sometimes, the most powerful man in the room is the one everyone is trying hardest to ignore. The ballroom fell silent so suddenly that even the crystal chandeliers seemed to stop shimmering. Conversations died in half-finished whispers. A fork slipped against a china plate somewhere near the back, and at the center of it all stood a single father in a modest navy suit, one hand resting protectively on his little girl's shoulder, while the groom stared at him as if the past had just stepped out of the shadows. Then the groom said one word, low at first, almost disbelieving, then louder, with the kind of respect that could not be faked. "Commander." The word landed like thunder in a room built for applause, not silence. Every eye turned to Ethan Carter. A moment earlier, most of those same eyes had looked straight through him. Some had judged him. Some had smirked. One had openly humiliated him. Now no one moved. No one even seemed to breathe. Beside him, 8-year-old Lily Carter tightened her small fingers around her father's hand. She didn't fully understand what had just changed, only that something had. A few minutes ago, she had been shrinking into herself, trying not to cry in a room where everything sparkled except the people. Now she looked up at her father with wide, searching eyes, as if she were seeing a side of him that the world had somehow forgotten. Ethan, however, did not change expression. He didn't straighten in surprise, didn't smile in satisfaction, didn't look around to enjoy the shock spreading across the faces of the wealthy guests. He simply stood there, calm and unreadable, like a man who had spent years learning how to stay steady while everyone else lost their balance. Across from him, Olivia Sinclair felt her stomach drop. Just seconds earlier, she had been standing in the center of her perfect wedding reception like a queen surveying her kingdom, her white designer gown flawless, her diamonds glinting under soft gold lights, her smile polished for every camera in the room. She had spent months orchestrating every detail of this evening. The flowers had come from Italy. The string quartet had been flown in from New York. Even the candles had been custom chosen to match the pale ivory and champagne palette of the reception hall. Everything was curated. Everything was controlled. And then Ethan Carter had walked in with his daughter, and somehow, in Olivia's eyes, they had ruined the picture. He wasn't loud. He wasn't drunk. He wasn't rude. In fact, he had done everything right. He arrived on time. He kept to himself. He spoke gently to his daughter and smiled politely when spoken to. But to Olivia, that almost made it worse. His quiet presence, his simple suit, Lily's inexpensive little dress, the way they held themselves with dignity instead of apology, it all offended something in her that money had only made sharper. So she had done what people like Olivia often do when they feel threatened by something they cannot easily define. She had looked down on it. She had questioned whether Ethan was really invited. She had made a cutting remark about family weddings not being charity events. She had smiled while saying it, the way cruel people often do when they want witnesses more than consequences. And when Lily had heard enough to lower her eyes and grip her father's hand tighter, Olivia had still not stopped. But now the groom was walking toward Ethan, and the air itself felt different. Not tense in the way it had been moments before, petty, social, brittle, but heavy with something deeper. Recognition, memory, debt. Daniel Brooks, the groom, no longer looked like a man worried about a wedding reception. He looked like a man who had just come face to face with someone he owed far more than words could repay. "Commander," he said again, this time with absolute certainty. And just like that, the man Olivia had mocked became the only man in the room everyone needed to understand. 45 minutes earlier, Ethan Carter had paused just outside the grand entrance of the Sinclair estate and looked down at his daughter as a valet in white gloves opened the door for them. "You okay?" he asked softly. Lily nodded, though her eyes were already wide with the kind of wonder only a child could carry so honestly. She had never seen anything like this before. The estate glowed against the deepening evening sky like something lifted out of a movie. Arched windows spilling warm gold light, trimmed hedges wrapped in tiny white bulbs, fountains catching the last traces of sunset, and luxury cars lined up in a gleaming row along the circular drive. Guests stepped out in silk, satin, and tailored black tuxedos, laughing in smooth, polished voices as if elegance were the easiest thing in the world. Lily tugged lightly on the sleeve of Ethan's jacket. "It looks like a castle," she whispered. Ethan smiled, and for just a second, some of the fatigue in his face softened. "Yeah," he said, Guess it kind of does. Lily looked down at her pale blue dress and brushed the fabric flat with both hands. It was simple, bought carefully and a little nervously from a department store sale rack 3 towns over, then hemmed by Ethan at their kitchen table after she went to bed. The shoes on her feet were new too, though not expensive. Ethan had saved for weeks so she could have them. He knew children noticed these things long before adults admitted they did. He also knew what it was like to walk into a room already aware of what people might think. "You look beautiful," he told her, and he meant it in the fullest way a father can mean such a thing, not because of the dress itself, but because of the bright sincerity in her face, the bravery in how she kept showing up to the world without armor. Lily searched his expression to make sure he wasn't just saying it. Then she smiled. "You look nice too, Dad." Ethan gave a quiet laugh. "Well, that makes one of us." But beneath the gentle humor, there was tension he could not quite shake. He adjusted the cuff of his navy suit, a suit he rarely wore and had owned for years, and checked the folded invitation in his inside pocket for what must have been the 4th time since they left home. His name was on it. Daniel Brooks had invited him personally. There was no mistake. Still, standing at the edge of that perfect world, Ethan felt the old instinct settle in. Stay alert, stay calm. Don't make anything harder for Lily than it has to be. He had almost not come. When the invitation first arrived, embossed and formal, he had set it on the kitchen counter and stared at it for a long time after Lily fell asleep. Weddings were not his kind of place. Grand rooms filled with strangers, money, and social rituals he had long ago stopped trying to understand held no appeal for him. But Daniel's handwritten note inside had changed things. "Hope you'll come. It would mean a lot. And if you bring Lily, my bride says children are welcome." Ethan had read that line twice. Not because he believed it completely, but because he wanted to. He wanted one easy evening for his daughter. One memory made of lights and music and something lovely. So he came. As they entered the reception hall, Lily's small hand slipped into his, warm and trusting. Music drifted through the ballroom from a live quartet near the far wall. Servers moved between clusters of guests carrying silver trays of sparkling drinks and delicate appetizers too pretty to touch. The air smelled faintly of roses, polished wood, and expensive perfume. Above them, chandeliers cast everything in a soft, flattering glow, the kind that made wealth look effortless and distance look elegant. Lily leaned closer and whispered, "Do you think we're really supposed to be here?" Ethan looked at her, then at the room beyond, and squeezed her hand gently. "We were invited," he said. "So yes, we belong here as much as anyone else." At the time, he still believed that would be enough. At first, Olivia Sinclair noticed Ethan and Lily the way she noticed everything that did not fit the image she had spent months constructing. Her eyes found them from across the ballroom while she stood surrounded by bridesmaids, florists making last-minute adjustments, and distant relatives eager to flatter her. She was smiling for someone's phone camera when her expression changed for only a fraction of a second, so brief that most people would have missed it. But those who knew Olivia well would have recognized it immediately. It was the look she wore whenever reality refused to match her expectations. Her gaze moved from Ethan's older suit to Lily's simple dress, then back again, cataloging them not as guests, but as disruptions. "Who are they?" she asked, not to anyone in particular, but in the soft, clipped tone of a woman accustomed to getting answers. One bridesmaid glanced over her shoulder. "I'm not sure," she said. "Maybe someone from Daniel's side?" Olivia did not respond right away. She kept watching. Ethan had guided Lily toward the edge of the room rather than the center, choosing a quiet spot near one of the tall floral arrangements where they would be least likely to draw attention. He bent slightly to say something to his daughter, and Lily smiled up at him, pointing at the dance floor with open delight. There was nothing improper about them, nothing loud, nothing rude. And yet Olivia felt a sharp irritation she could not fully explain, only justify. It wasn't simply that they looked less polished than the rest of the guests. It was that they did not seem ashamed of it. They stood there with a quiet self-possession that, to someone like Olivia, could feel almost insolent. She had spent most of her life in rooms where wealth determined comfort, where people understood invisible lines without needing them spoken aloud. The right schools, the right clubs, the right neighborhoods, the right names. She had been taught to recognize status the way some children are taught to recognize danger. And she had also learned something even more corrosive, that if you act as though you belong at the top, Most people will never question whether you deserve to be there. Olivia had built her identity on that principle. Her wedding was not just a celebration. It was a statement. The venue, the guest list, the imported flowers, the custom dress, the carefully staged elegance of it all. It was meant to communicate something very clear. She had won. She had married well. She had created a life that looked untouchable from the outside. So when she saw Ethan and Lily standing beneath the chandeliers, looking small but strangely unbothered, it pricked at her in a way she didn't like. They look lost, one of the bridesmaids murmured, trying to be helpful. Olivia gave a thin smile. No, she said quietly. Lost people usually know they're lost. A few feet away, her mother, Margaret Sinclair, followed Olivia's line of sight and lowered her voice. Do we know them? Olivia took a sip of champagne before answering. I doubt it, she said. At least not from my side. Margaret studied Ethan for a moment with the practiced eye of a woman who had spent decades sorting people by usefulness, pedigree, and presentation. Daniel can be sentimental, she said. Maybe some old connection. Olivia's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. That possibility annoyed her more than it should have. Daniel had always been less impressed by money than she was comfortable with. It had seemed charming at first, even grounding. But now, on a night where every detail was supposed to reflect their shared future, she did not want reminders of a past she could neither curate nor control. Across the room, Lily laughed softly at something her father said, and Ethan reached down to smooth a loose strand of hair behind her ear. It was such an ordinary, tender gesture that it should have been invisible in a room full of grander things. Instead, it became the moment Olivia decided she wanted them gone. Not immediately, not yet, but soon. Because in her world, discomfort did not sit unanswered for long. And what Olivia did next would turn a quiet evening into something no one in that ballroom would forget. Olivia did not walk over to Ethan and Lily right away. That would have looked too obvious, too emotional, too much like the kind of scene she claimed to despise. Instead, she did what polished cruelty often does best. She approached indirectly, with a smile, a question, and just enough sweetness to make the insult land deeper. She waited until a few more guests had gathered nearby, until a server passed with champagne, until the music softened between songs. Then she crossed the floor with the graceful confidence of someone who had never once doubted she belonged in every room she entered. Ethan saw her coming before Lily did. Something in her expression was too composed, too deliberate. He had known people like that before, not always wealthy, not always elegant, but always dangerous in the same quiet way. They smiled before they cut. Lily looked up a second later and instinctively moved a little closer to her father's side. You must be from. Daniel sighed. Olivia said brightly as she stopped in front of them. Her voice was warm enough to sound welcoming to anyone who wasn't listening carefully. I'm Olivia. Ethan gave a polite nod. Ethan Carter. This is my daughter, Lily. Lily offered a small shy smile. Hi. Olivia's gaze dropped to the child for half a beat, then lifted again just as smoothly. Of course, she said. And which family are you with? The question was simple on the surface, but the wording was not accidental. Ethan understood that immediately. It was not who invited you. It was what are you doing here? Daniel invited us, he said evenly. Personally. Olivia's smile did not fade, but something in it sharpened. Personally, she repeated, as though the word itself needed verification. Around them, a couple standing near the bar had grown quieter. A bridesmaid passing behind Olivia slowed without meaning to. Ethan could feel the subtle shift that happens when a private slight begins to attract public attention. He kept his voice calm. Yes. Olivia tilted her head. I'm sure there's some explanation, she said. It's just that this reception is a little more intimate than the ceremony. We've had to be very careful with the guest list. Lily looked up at her father, confused now. Ethan rested a hand lightly on her shoulder. We have an invitation, he said. If you'd like, I can show it to you. Olivia gave a soft laugh, quick and dismissive, the kind meant to make reason sound awkward. No need to be defensive, she said. I'm only trying to avoid any embarrassment. The word hung there for a moment. Not embarrassment for her. Not embarrassment for the event. Embarrassment for him. Ethan let the silence sit. He had learned long ago that some people grew bolder when you rushed to defend yourself. Olivia took his stillness as permission to continue. You understand, she said. lowering her voice just enough to seem discreet while ensuring the nearest guests could still hear. These events can be overwhelming if you're not used to them, especially for children. Lily's fingers curled tighter into Ethan's hand. I'm okay, she said quietly, before he could answer. Olivia looked at her and smiled again, but there was no kindness in it now. I'm sure you're doing your best, sweetheart. Ethan's jaw tightened, though his face hardly changed. It was a small sentence, but it carried the full weight of condescension. Toward the child, toward him, toward the life Olivia had already decided was beneath her. A man near the champagne tower glanced over, then away, pretending not to hear. Another woman lowered her eyes into her glass. Everyone nearby understood what was happening. Almost no one stepped in. We're fine, Ethan said at last. His tone remained controlled, but something colder had entered it. We're here to celebrate Daniel. Olivia folded her hands lightly at her waist, all satin and diamonds and social precision. Then perhaps, she said, you'll understand why appearances matter tonight. It was the first truly honest thing she had said to him. And it was also the moment Ethan realized this was not going to stop on its own. If Olivia had stopped there, the evening might still have been salvaged. The insult would have remained what so many public humiliations begin as, a sharp moment, ugly but survivable, one that decent people could later pretend they had not fully understood. But Olivia was not interested in leaving things ambiguous. She wanted Ethan to feel small, and worse than that, she wanted him to know that everyone else had seen it happen. Ethan could sense the direction of it now. The room had not gone silent, but the atmosphere around them had changed in that familiar social way where people continue sipping champagne and adjusting cufflinks while quietly leaning closer to the cruelty unfolding nearby. No one wanted to be part of the scene, but many were willing to witness it. Lily, still holding her father's hand, looked from Olivia's face to Ethan's and then down at the polished floor. Children do not always understand adult language, but they understand tone faster than most grown people admit. They know when they are being welcomed and when they are merely being tolerated until someone finds the courage to push them away. Olivia gave a gentle sigh, performing patience for the small audience now orbiting the exchange. I'm sure Daniel meant well, she said. He has a habit of trying to include everyone. The line was delivered lightly, almost playfully, but it landed exactly where she intended. Include everyone. As if Ethan and Lily were a charitable exception. As if their presence had been granted by generosity rather than invitation. Ethan felt Lily lean closer into his side. He looked down at her for a second, and in that brief glance there was a whole father's calculation. How much she had heard, how much she understood, how long he should stay before protecting her meant leaving. We won't be any trouble, he said. It was a simple sentence, but as soon as it left his mouth, Olivia's eyes changed. She had heard what she wanted in it. Restraint, not resistance. To someone like her, dignity often looked like surrender. That's kind of you, she replied. Still, there are certain areas reserved for close family and longtime friends. She let her gaze sweep over Lily's dress and then Ethan's suit again, so quickly that anyone determined to excuse her still could. It might be more comfortable for you to wait near the outer terrace. It's quieter there. Ethan understood the message perfectly. Out of sight, away from the photographs, the chandeliers, the curated beauty of Olivia's night. Somewhere less visible. Somewhere more appropriate for people she had already classified as lesser. Dad, Lily asked in a small voice. Did we do something wrong? The question, soft as it was, seemed to cut through even the surrounding music. Ethan turned immediately. No, he said, kneeling slightly so he could look at her at eye level. No, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong. Lily searched his face, wanting to believe him. But children are often caught between what a parent says and what the world is showing them. Olivia shifted her weight, impatient now that the moment had become emotional in a way she could not fully manage. No one is saying anyone did anything wrong, she said smoothly. We just want a night to feel appropriate. The word struck harder than the others had. Appropriate. As though Lily's wide-eyed wonder, Ethan's quiet presence, their modest clothes, their entire existence in that room, had somehow violated a dress code no invitation could override. A server passing with a silver tray slowed almost imperceptibly before moving on. Near the back, one of the men stationed with the private security team glanced over and frowned, not at Ethan, but at the shape of the conversation. Still, no one intervened. Olivia, sensing the room's attention and mistaking it for approval, took one step further than she had before. "Honestly," she said, lowering her voice only enough to sharpen its cruelty, "a wedding like this can be confusing for children who aren't used to this kind of environment." Then she looked directly at Lily and added, "Sometimes it's better not to put them in situations where they'll feel out of place." Lily's lips parted, but no words came out. Her eyes dropped. Ethan rose slowly to his full height, and though his expression remained controlled, something in him had gone completely still. The line had been crossed. Olivia just didn't know it yet. There are moments when a room changes before anyone fully understands why. This was one of them. Ethan stood motionless beside his daughter, his hand still wrapped around hers, while Olivia's last words seemed to linger in the air like perfume gone sour. Around them, conversations faltered. A few nearby guests looked away, suddenly fascinated by their glasses, their phones, the floral arrangements. Anything but the little girl who had just been told, in the polished language of high society, that she did not belong. Lily blinked rapidly, trying with all the fierce dignity a child can summon not to cry in public. Ethan saw it, and something behind his calm eyes hardened. Not into anger exactly. Anger was loud. This was older than anger. Colder. The kind of stillness forged in men who have learned that the most dangerous response is not always the fastest one. He lowered his head slightly toward Lily. "You don't have to listen to that," he said softly. "Stay with me." She nodded, but her face had lost its earlier wonder. The castle glow of the evening was fading for her now, replaced by the painful awareness that some beautiful places are built to remind certain people. They were never meant to enter. Olivia seemed relieved by Ethan's lack of open confrontation. In her mind, she had already won. He was standing there quietly, not raising his voice, not making a scene, not forcing her into the ugly public conflict she could later be blamed for. To her, this meant he understood his place. "I think that would be best," she said, with the finality of a woman closing a door. "If you take her outside for a bit." Ethan lifted his eyes to meet hers, and for the first time something in his gaze seemed to unsettle her. It was not pleading, not shame, not even visible resentment. It was judgment, stripped clean of theatrics. The kind that does not need words because it has already reached its conclusion. Before he could answer, a voice rose from across the room. "Excuse me, where's Daniel?" One of the groomsmen asked, weaving through guests near the dance floor. A small ripple of movement followed. People shifted. Heads turned. The groom had been gone only a short while, pulled away for photographs with older relatives near the West Garden. But his return now came with a timing so sharp it felt almost staged by fate itself. Daniel Brooks stepped through the open archway from the corridor beyond, one hand loosening his bow tie slightly, as if the formalities of the evening had already begun to wear on him. He was smiling at something an older uncle had just said, but the smile disappeared almost immediately when he noticed the tension in the room ahead. It was subtle at first, the way clusters of guests were angled toward one corner of the ballroom, the way Olivia was standing too straight, the way no one near her seemed willing to move. Daniel followed their line of sight. He saw Olivia. He saw Ethan. He saw Lily with her small shoulders drawn in and her chin lowered. And then he stopped walking. Something about his face changed so completely that even people who had never met him before could see it. It was not confusion. It was recognition colliding with disbelief. For a second, he simply stared, as though the sight of Ethan Carter standing beneath those chandeliers made no sense in a world like this one. Then his attention sharpened. The years between past and present seemed to collapse behind his eyes. He took one step forward, then another. The music from the quartet continued somewhere in the background, but no one was listening anymore. Olivia turned slightly, relief flickering across her face when she saw him approaching. She likely imagined he would support her, smooth over the awkwardness, preserve the image she had fought so carefully to maintain. But Daniel wasn't looking at her. Not really. His gaze never left Ethan. By the time he reached the center of the gathering crowd, his expression had shifted from surprise to something much deeper. Something that looked almost like reverence. His mouth opened, then closed again, as if even he needed a second to trust what he was seeing. And when he finally spoke, his voice carried across the ballroom with the weight of memory, respect, and shock all at once. "Commander." The word seemed too large for the room. Commander. It did not belong among champagne flutes, string music, and polished wedding smiles. It carried weight, history, obedience, survival. For one suspended second, no one moved at all. Even Olivia, who until that moment had controlled the rhythm of every exchange around her, simply stared at Daniel as if she had misheard him. But she had not. Everyone had heard it. And more importantly, everyone had heard the way he said it. Not casually, not as a joke, not as some exaggerated nickname dredged up for old times' sake. He had said it with instinctive respect, the kind a man does not manufacture in front of an audience. Ethan's face remained composed, though something in his eyes shifted almost invisibly. He had not expected this. Not here. Not tonight. Daniel, he said quietly, a note of restraint in his voice that only made the moment feel heavier. But Daniel was already stepping closer, his expression caught somewhere between disbelief and gratitude. I can't believe this, he said, shaking his head once as if trying to steady himself. It's really you. A murmur moved through the guests like wind through dry leaves. Names still meant little to them, but tone meant everything. The groom of the evening, the man every eye had been following, every camera had been chasing, was now standing in front of the single father Olivia had been trying to push out of sight, and he looked at him the way people look at those who once carried them through fire. Olivia gave a tight laugh that collapsed almost as soon as it left her mouth. Daniel, she said, careful, smiling too quickly. You know him. Daniel turned to her then, and something in his face made her smile falter completely. Know him, he repeated. There was no anger in his voice yet, but there was astonishment, sharp, unmistakable, and growing. He looked back at Ethan, then at Lily, then once more at Olivia as if assembling the shape of what must have happened before he arrived. Olivia, he said slowly, this is Ethan Carter. He said the name like it should have meant something to everyone. To most of the room, it didn't. Not yet. But Daniel kept going, because some truths announce themselves with titles, and some require witness. He was my commander, he said, louder now, his voice carrying toward the edges of the ballroom. The best officer I ever served under. The man who brought people home when they should have died. The silence that followed was deeper than the first. Not shocked curiosity now, but impact. Realization. The guests who had been quietly observing the scene no longer looked entertained or politely uncomfortable. They looked unsettled. Ethan glanced at Lily, who was staring up at Daniel with new wonder, then back at the groom. That's enough, Ethan said under his breath, not wanting the room, not wanting spectacle. But Daniel either didn't hear him or chose not to stop. Maybe because he understood, more than anyone there, how often men like Ethan walked through the world carrying what they had done in silence while louder, emptier people claimed all the respect. You don't understand, Daniel said, now speaking to the room as much as to Olivia. If I'm standing here tonight, it's because of him. A woman near the bar lowered her champagne glass. One of the security men at the back straightened almost unconsciously. Margaret Sinclair's face lost color. Olivia's eyes moved from Daniel to Ethan and back again, as if she were searching for some version of this she could still manage. But the room had already shifted beyond her control. Daniel took one more step toward Ethan, and when he spoke again, the reverence in his voice was impossible to mistake. There were men twice my age who would have followed him into hell, he said. And most of us nearly did. Because when everything went bad, when everyone else was panicking, he was the one who stayed steady. He looked down briefly at Lily and softened. And he never left anyone behind. Lily's hand tightened around her father's. Olivia stood frozen in the center of her own perfect wedding, suddenly aware that the man she had dismissed as ordinary was not merely respected. He was the standard by which other men measured themselves. And in that terrible, irreversible instant, the entire room began to understand it too. Once the truth entered the room, it spread faster than embarrassment ever could. No one needed a full biography of Ethan Carter to understand that the hierarchy Olivia had relied on all evening had just collapsed beneath her feet. It was there in the way Daniel stood in front of him, not with social politeness, not with old-fashioned friendliness, but with unmistakable regard. It was there in the way the security guard nearest the west wall narrowed his eyes, as if reevaluating everything he had just witnessed. It was there in the faces of the guests who, only moments before, had watched in silence while a little girl was made to feel like an intrusion. Now those same guests looked as though they wished they had been anywhere else. Olivia drew in a careful breath, the kind people take when they are trying to regain control before anyone notices they have lost it. "Daniel," she said, forcing a small laugh that sounded brittle even to her own ears. "I was only trying to help. There seems to have been some misunderstanding." But the word misunderstanding landed weakly. Too weakly. Because everyone within earshot knew exactly what had happened, even if they had not heard every sentence. They had seen her posture. They had seen Lily's face. They had seen Ethan's silence, not as guilt now, but as restraint. Daniel turned to Olivia fully for the first time since recognizing Ethan, and what she found in his expression was not confusion. It was disappointment. Deep, immediate, impossible to soften. "A misunderstanding," he repeated. "Is that what you call this?" Olivia's shoulders tightened. I didn't know who he was. It was the worst possible thing she could have said, and the moment the words left her mouth, several people nearby seemed to feel it. Because in trying to defend herself, she had revealed the ugliest truth of all, that her behavior might have been acceptable, in her mind, if Ethan had really been ordinary. If he had truly been just a single father in an older suit, with a little girl in a simple blue dress, then humiliating him would not have felt like a moral failure to her, only a social correction. Ethan's expression did not change, but Daniel's did. "That's exactly the problem," he said. His voice was not loud, yet the quietness of it seemed to reach farther than a shout could have. Margaret Sinclair stepped forward then, sensing disaster and trying to contain it with the smooth authority of a woman long practiced in salvaging appearances. "I'm sure no offense was intended," she said, lifting her chin with brittle elegance. "Emotions are high on wedding days. Let's not make this into something larger than it is." Ethan looked at her for the first time, and Margaret's words seemed to shrink under the steadiness of his gaze. He still had not raised his voice, had not demanded apologies, had not once used Daniel's recognition as a weapon. That, more than anything, made Olivia feel exposed. If he had retaliated, she could have framed herself as the injured party. If he had lashed out, she could have called him unstable, inappropriate, dramatic. But Ethan did none of those things. He simply stood there beside his daughter, dignified and silent, while the room judged the contrast between them more harshly than any speech could have. Lily looked up at her father, then at Daniel, then back at Olivia with the uncertain hurt of a child trying to understand why kindness had become so complicated. One of the bridesmaids glanced away, eyes wet with second-hand shame. A man, near the front, cleared his throat and quietly stepped back, as though distance might erase his earlier silence. Daniel exhaled slowly and shook his head. "You made my guest feel unwelcome," he said. "You made his daughter feel small." Olivia opened her mouth, but no answer came. There was nothing left that would not sound worse. The chandeliers still glowed. The flowers still scented the air. The quartet still played softly in the background, absurdly elegant against the wreckage of the moment. But the illusion of the evening had shattered. This was no longer Olivia Sinclair's perfect wedding reception. It was the night everyone in the room learned what kind of woman she became when she thought no one important was watching. For a long moment after Daniel's words, no one in the ballroom seemed willing to claim the next sentence. The silence had changed again. It was no longer the shocked hush of revelation, nor the brittle stillness of social discomfort. It had become something heavier, an atmosphere of moral clarity that made every person in the room suddenly aware of who they had been a few minutes earlier, and who they wished they had been instead. Ethan looked down at Lily first. He always did. Her eyes were still bright with the effort of holding herself together, but now there was something else in them too. Confusion giving way to understanding, hurt slowly making room for pride. She did not fully grasp what commander meant, or why the groom's entire posture had shifted when he saw her father. But she understood enough to know that the room had changed because of him, not in spite of him. Ethan brushed a thumb lightly across the back of her hand. It was a small gesture, quiet and ordinary, but in that room it seemed to say more than anyone else had managed all evening. Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice slightly, though not enough to hide the sincerity in it. "I'm sorry," he said. "Both of you. You should never have been treated like that here." He looked directly at Lily when he said the second sentence, and that mattered. Children remember who sees them after they've been hurt. Lily nodded once, shy and uncertain, then pressed a little closer. To Ethan's side. Ethan met Daniel's eyes and gave the faintest incline of his head. "You don't owe me anything," he said. But she did. He glanced toward Lily, and Daniel's face tightened with quiet regret. Across the room, Olivia stood motionless, her hands clasped too tightly at her waist, while the polished confidence she had worn all night seemed to drain from her by degrees. She looked as though she wanted to speak, to repair, to explain, but every possible version of it had already arrived too late. Margaret remained near her daughter, equally silent now, no longer offering elegant corrections or careful social cover. There are moments when status cannot protect a person from being seen clearly. This was one of them. Daniel drew a slow breath and turned briefly toward the guests surrounding them. "Some people," he said, not loudly, "don't need to announce who they are. You know by how they carry others." The words settled over the crowd like a final verdict. No one challenged him. No one defended Olivia. A few guests lowered their heads. Others looked at Ethan with a new kind of respect, not the shallow respect people offer power when they recognize it, but the quieter kind born of shame and admiration mingled together. Ethan could have stayed. He could have let the room keep staring. He could have allowed Olivia to sit inside the full weight of her humiliation a little longer. Few would have blamed him. But men like Ethan were never interested in victory that looked too much like revenge. He bent slightly toward Lily. "Do you want to go home?" he asked. Lily hesitated, then nodded. "Can we get ice cream on the way?" The question was so childlike, so heartbreakingly normal after everything that had just happened, that a few people nearby smiled through their discomfort. Ethan's mouth softened into the first real smile he had shown all evening. "Yeah," he said. "We can do that." Daniel stepped aside for them. Not as a host dismissing guests, but as a man making room for someone he honored. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. Ethan paused beside him. "Take care of what matters," he replied. It was not advice given sharply, and yet Daniel seemed to feel the full force of it. Then Ethan took Lily's hand and walked with her toward the exit, steady and unhurried, under the same chandeliers that had once made them seem small. This time, no one looked past them. No one questioned whether they belonged. And as the doors closed behind father and daughter, the lesson they left in that glittering room was sharper than any insult, richer than any wedding, and impossible to forget. Real class is not measured by who gets invited to the table, but by how you treat the people you think have nothing to offer you.